Olivia Sterling threw the keys so hard they cracked against Ethan Carter's chest and landed in the gravel at his 9-year-old son's feet. 200 people in $5,000 suits went silent, then laughed. "Take it," she said. "It's worthless anyway." Ethan knelt down, picked the keys out of the dirt, and said thank you. 9 weeks later, 3 men flew in from Germany, opened a hood in a leaking garage in Ohio, and one of them started crying. What Ethan found under that rust was worth $9 million, and it was only the second most valuable thing in that car. Comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. And subscribe, because you're going to want the ending. Ethan Carter counted $840 onto the hood of his truck, folded it into a white envelope, wrote "Tools Only" across the front in black marker, and taped it to the dashboard where he'd have to look at it. His son watched from the passenger seat. "Why'd you write on it?" "Because if I don't, I'll spend it on something stupid." "Like what?" "Like breakfast." Sam Carter was 9 years old and already smart enough to know when his father was joking to cover something. He looked at the envelope a while longer. "Is that all the money we have?" Ethan started the truck. "That's all the money we brought," he said. "There's a difference." There wasn't a difference. But the boy let him have it. They drove 40 minutes east out past the last of the shuttered plants, up into the part of the county where the roads got smoother and the fences got taller. Ethan had never been on this road in his life. He knew that fact was going to matter today, and he'd already decided not to care about it. "Dad?" "Yeah." "What's an estate auction?" "It's when somebody dies with too much stuff." "That's it. That's the whole thing, bud. Somebody spends 80 years buying things, and then one Saturday morning, a bunch of strangers show up and take it apart." Sam thought about that. "That's kind of sad." "It's very sad," Ethan said. "But today, it's useful because I need a lathe." "What's a lathe?" "It's the reason my shop makes money instead of losing it." The gate at Sterling Ridge was iron and about 11 feet tall, and there was a man in a black jacket with a clipboard standing in front of it. Ethan rolled his window down. The man looked at the truck first, a 98 F-250, with a rust bloom over the rear wheel and a magnet sign on the door that said, "Carter Restoration, Millbrook." "Oh," and then looked at Ethan, and then looked at the boy, and then looked back down at the clipboard. "Are you catering?" "No, sir, I'm here for the auction. Bidder's entrance is around. This is the bidder's entrance." The man's jaw moved. "Name?" "Carter. Ethan Carter." He flipped 2 pages, flipped them back. Ethan watched him do it and felt the old thing come up in his chest, the one he'd been swallowing for 3 years, and he swallowed it again. "You're pre-registered." "I registered online Tuesday. There's a confirmation number if you want it." "That won't be necessary." The man handed him a paddle. "Number 44. Park in the lower field." "The lower field?" "The lower field, sir." Ethan took the paddle. "Appreciate it." He drove through, and Sam waited until they were up the driveway before he said, "He didn't want to let us in." "He let us in." "But he didn't want to." "Sam?" Ethan looked at him. "Listen to me, because I'm only going to say this once today. There are going to be people here who look at this truck and decide they already know everything about us. You know what we do about that? What? Nothing. We do absolutely nothing. Because they're wrong, and being wrong is punishment enough." Sam nodded slowly, the way kids do when they file something away to understand later. The lower field had 11 cars in it. The upper lot, the paved one, had about 90, and Ethan didn't recognize half the badges on them. The house was the kind of house that made you talk quieter without deciding to. There was a tent on the lawn with white chairs under it, and a man in a headset walking the rows and long tables of numbered lots, silver art watches, a rack of shotguns, a first edition something under glass with a guard standing over it. Waiters carried trays around at 10 in the morning. Ethan led Sam past all of it, toward the outbuildings where the mechanical lots were, and a woman with a headset stepped in front of him. "Sir, the tent is this way." I'm looking at lots 240 through 310. Those are shop contents. I know, that's what I came for. She actually smiled, and it wasn't a mean smile, which somehow made it worse. Most people don't come for those. I'm not most people, ma'am. I'm a mechanic. Marcus Webb found him 10 minutes later in the second garage bay, where Ethan was on one knee with a flashlight in his teeth, checking the bed play on a 1953 Monarch lathe. You're the one who called about the tooling. Ethan stood up. Webb was in his 50s, expensive glasses. The kind of handshake that told you he'd been doing this a long time and had stopped being impressed by anybody. Ethan Carter. Marcus Webb. I run the estate. He looked at the lathe. You know what that is. I know it's a Monarch, and I know somebody kept it aligned for 60 years, which tells me more about the man who owned it than anything in that tent does. Webb's eyebrows went up half an inch. Arthur Sterling, he said, used to run that machine himself. 2-3 in the morning, couldn't sleep, 81 years old and worth what he was worth, and you'd find him out here making a bushing for something. For what? Never asked. Webb shrugged. Wasn't my business. Ethan looked around the bay. Pegboards, every tool hung and outlined in marker. Floor swept, a coffee can of cotter pins sorted by size. How much you think it'll go for? The Monarch 4500. Nobody in that tent knows what it is. Then I've got a chance. You've got a chance, Webb agreed. And then after a second, bring the boy in when they call it. Kid ought to see a man buy a machine that outlives him. The mechanical lots went at 1140. The lathe opened at 200. Ethan raised his paddle at 250. A man in a linen jacket 2 rows up raised his at 400 without looking away from his phone. Ethan went to 5. Linen jacket went to 750. Ethan looked at the envelope in his shirt pocket. $840. He raised his paddle. 800. 9 pounding, said Linen Jacket. Sir, the auctioneer said to Ethan. Ethan had 840. He needed 40 of it for gas home and dinner. Sir, 850. Sam was looking up at him. Ethan lowered the paddle. Out. Sold 900 paddle 16. And Ethan heard Linen Jacket say to the woman beside him, It'll look incredible in the entryway. We'll put a plant on it. Sam felt his father's hand tighten on his shoulder once and then let go. Dad, it's fine. You wanted that. I wanted it. Wanting isn't the same as needing. Ethan made himself smile. Come on, let's go look at the parts bins before some guy buys those to hold his flowers. They went back out through the bays. Ethan bought a box of NOS hardware for $30 and a set of British spanners for $15 because nobody bid against him. And he felt a little better, and then he turned a corner into a third bay at the far end of the row that he hadn't known was there. It was dark. Nobody was in it. There were no numbered tags, and there was something under a canvas cover against the back wall. Sam got there first. Dad, is this a car? Sam, don't. The boy had already lifted the corner. Ethan didn't move for 11 seconds. He knew it was 11 because he counted the way he used to count under pressure at a job he didn't have anymore, back when 11 seconds of thinking was cheaper than 11 months of being wrong. What he was looking at, under about 40 years of dust and one bad water stain, was a car. Except it wasn't. Dad, hang on. It's ugly. It's not ugly. Ethan crouched at the front wheel. It's unfinished. That's different. Somebody stopped. How do you know? Because look at this. He put 2 fingers on the fender lip. See that seam? That's not a stamping. That's hammer formed. Somebody made this panel by hand over a buck with a mallet, and then somebody else finished it with a file, and you can see where they stopped filing. Right there, mid-stroke. So nobody hand forms a body panel in America after about 1965 unless they're building one of something? Ethan stood and moved to the door. And nobody builds one of something unless they're proving something. He tried the handle. It opened. The hinge didn't drop. 40 years, and the hinge didn't drop. Sam, hand me the flashlight. The interior smelled like old leather and older dust. Ethan didn't sit down. He leaned across the sill and put the light on the firewall, and then he went very still again. What is it? There's no VIN plate. What's a VIN? Every car built in America has a number. Every single one. It's like a birth certificate. This one doesn't have it. He moved the light. It has this instead. Riveted to the firewall was a small brass tag green with age. 6 characters stamped into it. No manufacturer, no year, no plant code. And underneath, hand engraved with a scribe, not a machine, a S1 of 1. Do not scrap. Ethan backed out of the car and stood in the dark with his heart going. Dad, you're doing the thing. What thing? The thing where you go quiet and Mom used to say you were leaving the room without walking out of it. Ethan laughed once out loud, surprised. Yeah, okay. I'm doing the thing. He popped the hood. And that was when he stopped being a guy at an auction and became something else, because the engine in there was aluminum, where it should have been iron. The intake manifold was one piece cast with runners that curved in a way that no production tooling in 1978 could have pulled off. And the welds around the header collectors were stacked so evenly they looked machine-laid, except they weren't, because every 11th bead was a hair wider, the way a human hand gets tired. That's not possible, Ethan said. What's not? This engine. This engine isn't... He stopped, started over. Sam, this car is like finding a paper airplane that somebody built out of titanium. It doesn't make sense. Somebody spent an enormous amount of money and skill on a thing they then covered up and left in a garage. Why would they do that? That, Ethan said, is a really good question. Yes, said a voice behind them. It is. There were maybe 9 of them in the doorway, and the light was behind them, and the one in front was a woman in a charcoal suit with her arms crossed. Olivia Sterling was 29 years old. She had buried her father 16 days earlier. She had not cried at the funeral, which 2 separate business publications had found space to mention. She had spent the morning being told by her father's board that they'd like her to consider an advisory role, and she had spent the afternoon watching strangers put price tags on the house she grew up in. And by 2 o'clock, she was made almost entirely out of a feeling she had no name for and no intention of examining. And here was a man in work boots with his hands inside her father's engine. "Can I help you?" she said. It was not a question. Ethan straightened up and wiped his palms on his jeans. Sorry, door was open. My son, you brought a child. Ma'am, I was just looking. I'll close it up. Do you know what that is? No, Ethan said. That's actually the interesting part. Somebody in the group behind her laughed. Olivia stepped into the bay. It's junk. My father kept it for 30 years, and it has never once been on a road. It's not in the catalog because Marcus tells me it isn't worth the cost of moving it. So no, it's not interesting. It's the single most expensive piece of garbage in the state of Ohio. With respect, Ethan said, I don't think that's true. The bay got quieter. Excuse me, I said I don't think that's true. He said it evenly without heat, which somehow made it land harder. Ma'am, the intake on this engine is a single cast piece with variable radius runners. In 1978, 3 foundries on Earth could pour that, and 2 of them were in Europe. The body panels are hand-formed. There's no VIN. There's a hand-engraved tag on the firewall that says, "Do not scrap." He paused. Somebody didn't forget about this car. Somebody protected it. On purpose. For a long time. Olivia stared at him. Who are you? Ethan Carter. I restore old machines. You're a mechanic. Yes, ma'am. And you've decided in 4 minutes that you understand my father's garage better than the appraisal firm I'm paying 6 figures. No, ma'am. I've decided that they didn't come out to this bay. That did it. Somebody in the group said, "Oh," quietly, the way people do at a boxing match. Olivia's face changed. Not much. But Ethan had seen that specific change before on a program manager in a conference room in Huntsville 11 years ago, 4 days before Ethan's report got buried, and he knew exactly what came next. Do you know what I think? she said. "I think you saw an address in an obituary and drove up here in a rusted-out pickup to see if the grieving daughter would let you leave with something. I think men like you read estate listings the way other people read the racing form. Ma'am, I think you brought the kid because the kid works." Ethan's whole body went still. "Don't," he said. "Excuse me. You can say whatever you want to me," Ethan said. "You've had a bad month and I'm a stranger and I'm standing in your father's garage and I get it. I do. But you don't talk about my son." Nobody laughed at that one. Olivia held his eyes for a second, and something flickered some part of her that knew right then that she was about 4 sentences past the place where she could still stop. She didn't stop. She turned to the woman on her left. "Do we have the keys to this thing? Ms. Sterling, do we have the keys?" The woman produced a ring with 2 keys and a faded paper tag from a lockbox on the wall and handed them over like she wished she hadn't. Olivia weighed them in her palm. "You want it," Ethan said. "What?" "You heard me." She was smiling now, and it was the worst thing in the bay. "You just gave a very moving speech about how everyone in my employ is too stupid to see the treasure in front of them. So take it. It's yours. Right now. Free. I'm not asking you for anything. That's what makes it a gift." She raised her voice, and the group in the doorway got bigger because these things travel across a lawn faster than sound. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man believes my father's 40-year-old lawn ornament is a national treasure. I'd like to reward that kind of vision." "Olivia." Marcus Webb pushing through. "Olivia, don't." "Marcus, get me a bill of sale." "Olivia, get me a bill of sale." Somebody handed her a clipboard. She wrote on it with a pen from her jacket fast and turned it around. $1, she said. "It has to be $1 apparently, or it's not legal. Sign it." Ethan looked at the clipboard. He looked at his son who had come to stand against his leg and who was looking up at all these adults with an expression Ethan would remember every single day for the rest of his life. And here is the thing that Ethan Carter understood in that moment, standing on the floor of a dead billionaire's garage with 90 people watching. He could refuse. He could keep his back straight, walk out with his boy, and drive home with his dignity and $30 of hardware and nothing else. And Sam would be proud of him for about a week. Or he could take the humiliation on purpose in front of all of them and take the car. He'd been standing in this exact spot before. 11 years ago, in a conference room with a report in his hand and a room full of men waiting to see if he'd sit down. He had not sat down. It had cost him a career. He was very, very tired of losing on principle. Ethan took the pen. He signed it. He reached into his shirt pocket, past the envelope that said "Tools Only," and he pulled out a $1 bill and set it on the clipboard and smoothed it flat with his thumb. "There you go," he said. "Paid in full." Olivia stared at the dollar. For 1/2 of 1 second, she looked like a person again. Then somebody's phone went up in the doorway, and she remembered she had an audience, and she threw the keys. She threw them harder than she meant to. She would think later 1,000 times at 3 in the morning, and they hit Ethan in the sternum with a sound people heard in the back, and dropped into the gravel by Sam's shoe. "Take it," she said. "It's worthless anyway." And the tent laughed. Ethan Carter got down on one knee in front of 200 people. He picked the keys out of the dirt. He stood up, and he put them in his pocket, and he looked at Olivia Sterling and said, "Thank you, ma'am. I'll take good care of it." Then he took his son's hand and walked out. Tidad. The laughing stopped about 9 seconds after they were gone, which was when everyone remembered they were at a funeral with hors d'oeuvres. In the lower field, Sam wouldn't get in the truck. "Sam?" "No." "Buddy, why didn't you say anything?" The boy's face was red and shaking. "She threw them at you. She threw them at you, and everybody laughed, and you said thank you." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Ethan crouched down on the grass so they were level. "Because I got the car," he said. "I don't care about the car. I know. I know you don't. Listen to me." He put a hand on each of Sam's shoulders. "You know what she wanted? She wanted me to yell. If I yell, then everybody in that tent goes home tonight and tells the story about the crazy guy in the boots. That's the whole story. That's all it ever is." He held Sam's eyes. "But I didn't yell. So now she has to go home tonight and be the person who threw keys at a man in front of his kid. And she has to be that person tomorrow too." Sam wiped his face with his sleeve. "That's not fair." "No," Ethan agreed. "It isn't. Your mother used to say the same thing." "What did she say?" "She said, Ethan, you let people underestimate you like it's a hobby." Sam laughed. It came out wet and surprised him. "Yeah," Ethan said. "She was funny." He stood up, and his knees popped, and he looked back up the hill at the garages. "Now come on. I have no idea how we're getting that thing home." Nobody would tow it. The estate's transport contractor wasn't authorized. The two flatbed companies Ethan called from the field said they were 4 hours out. A man loading a Porsche onto an enclosed trailer said, "Sorry, buddy, we're full," while looking at 40 feet of empty deck. Ethan sat on his tailgate for 20 minutes, doing math he didn't have the money for. Then an old man in a Carhartt jacket came down the hill on foot. He was maybe 70, 71. Big hands. Walked like his hips hurt, and he'd stopped mentioning it in 1994. "You the one that got the car?" "I'm the one." "Walt Hendricks." He didn't offer his hand. He offered a set of tow straps over his shoulder. "There's a rollback in the equipment barn. Belongs to the estate. Estate belongs to her, and she just gave you the vehicle in front of the county, so I figure the delivery's implied." Ethan stood up. "Sir, I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask." Walt spat in the grass. 31 years I worked for Arthur Sterling. Mowed his grass, fixed his boiler, kept his cars alive. And I have been standing in that doorway since about the third sentence." He looked at Ethan a long moment. "You said somebody protected it on purpose." "I did." "Well." Walt's jaw worked. "That's the first true thing anybody's said on this property in 16 days. They got it loaded at 4:30. It rolled. That was the first strange thing. 40 years sitting, and the wheels rolled, the brakes weren't seized, and the steering was tight." Ethan noticed and said nothing. Walt drove it down himself. Followed Ethan's truck the whole 40 minutes to Millbrook, backed the rollback up to the shop door like he'd been doing it his whole life, and set the car down on the cracked concrete of Carter Restoration at 9 minutes past 6. Ethan tried to hand him 220s. Walt didn't take them. "Son," he said, "can I tell you something, and then I'm going to leave because if I stay, I'll say too much." "Yes, sir." Walt looked at the car sitting there in the doorway with the last of the daylight on it. "Every month," he said. "For 30 years, first Sunday of the month, 7 a.m., rain, snow, Christmas, didn't matter, that man walked out to that bay by himself, locked the door behind him, started that engine, let it run about 20 minutes. He paused. Then he shut it off and came back to the house, and he didn't talk to anybody until noon." Ethan didn't move. 30 years. 30 years. He never drove it. Not 1 inch. Not 1 inch in all that time. Walt's voice caught somewhere, and he cleared it out. "And I asked him, one time in 2009, I said, 'Mr. Sterling, why do you start a car you never drive?' What did he say?" Walt got in the rollback and pulled the door shut and looked at Ethan through the open window. He said, "Walt, I'm not starting it. I'm keeping a promise." Then he drove off. Count. Ethan Carter stood alone in his shop until 9 o'clock that night. He put Sam to bed upstairs at 8:30, came back down, turned on the overheads and pulled a stool up in front of that car and just looked at it the way you look at a person you're pretty sure you've met before. Around 10, he went and got the battery out of his own truck. He didn't expect anything. 40 years of sitting. Fuel turned to varnish seals, dried to paper. Everything about it said no. He hooked the cables. He got in. He put the key in. He turned it. The starter spun dry ugly wrong, and nothing happened. Second try. Nothing. Third try. Ethan held it 3 seconds longer than he should have, and the engine caught. It caught, and it settled. and it idled smooth as a sewing machine, and the whole building filled with a sound Ethan had never heard come out of a combustion engine in his life. Not deep, not loud, but layered, like there were two notes in it and the second one didn't belong to any firing order he could name. He sat there with his hands on a steering wheel. A dead man had touched every first Sunday for 30 years. And then because he'd been a mechanic long enough to check gauges, even when his hands were shaking, he looked down. The odometer read 6 miles. 6. Not 60,000. Not 600. 6. Ethan reached over and shut the engine off, and in the silence that came after he heard something shift and slide under the passenger seat. Something that had been wedged there for a very long time that had finally come loose. After 30 years of a man starting an engine, he never drove. He leaned across. He put his hand under the seat, and his fingers closed around the hard leather corner of a book. It was 11 minutes past 10 when Ethan Carter pulled the book out from under the passenger seat and set it on his knee. It was leather dark and soft at the corners, wrapped twice around with a bootlace. The lace had been tied and untied so many times the ends had gone furry. He sat there in the driver's seat of a car he had owned for 4 hours, and he did not open it. "That's not mine," he said out loud to nobody. He carried it into the office, set it on the desk under the lamp, and stood over it with his arms crossed for a full 3 minutes. Then he went upstairs and checked on his son, who was asleep on top of the covers, with his shoes still on, and Ethan took the shoes off and pulled the blanket up and came back down and sat at the desk and put both hands flat on either side of that book, like a man about to move something heavy. "Okay, Mr. Sterling," he said. "Let's see what you did." He untied the lace. The first page had 4 words on it in blue ink, and the handwriting was steady, and the ink had gone brown with age. Ethan read them. Then he shut the book hard and pushed back from the desk so fast the chair hit the wall. He stood in the middle of his own office, breathing like he'd run somewhere, because the 4 words on the first page of Arthur Sterling's private journal were, "I am not sorry." Ethan did not open it again that night. He was 38 years old, and he had learned somewhere along the line that there are things you should not read at 11 o'clock when you are tired and your hands are still shaking. He tied the lace back around it, put it in the gun safe he used for customer titles, spun the dial, and went to bed. He was in the shop again at 4:50 in the morning. Not to read, to work. Because Ethan Carter had one rule he had never broken in 9 years of restoration, and the rule was that you do not touch the paperwork until you have touched the metal, or you will start seeing what you were told to see instead of what is actually in front of you. By 6, he had the car up on stands. By 7, he had stopped being able to breathe properly. Sam came down at 7:15 in his pajamas and found his father lying on his back on a creeper under the car with a flashlight completely still. "Dad." "Yeah." "You didn't come up." "No." "Did you sleep?" "Some." "That's a lie." "That's a lie," Ethan agreed. Sam sat down cross-legged on the cold floor by the front tire. "Is it good?" Ethan rolled out from under the car and sat up and looked at his son with an expression Sam had genuinely never seen on him before. "Bud," he said, "I need you to understand something. I worked 11 years in aerospace. I have had my hands inside things that went to orbit." He pointed under the car with the flashlight. "There is a suspension component under there that I cannot identify. I don't mean I don't know the part number. I mean I do not know what it is for." "What's it look like?" "It looks like somebody solved a problem I didn't know existed." At 8:10, he called the only person he still spoke to from the old life. Priya Raman answered on the 4th ring, sounding like she was walking. "Carter, it's been 3 years." "I know." "You didn't call when your wife died." "I know that too." There was a pause on the line, and when she came back, her voice had changed. "Okay, what do you need?" "I need you to tell me I'm crazy." "Always." "About what?" Ethan told her. It took 9 minutes. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she said, "Send me photos of the intake." "Priya." "Send me photos of the intake, Ethan, and don't send them to my work address." That was the first moment he understood this was going to get bigger than his garage. He sent 11 photos at 8:32. She called back at 8:41. "Where are you?" she said. "Ohio." "No, where is the car?" 12 feet from me." "Is the building locked?" Priya. "Is the building locked, Ethan?" He got up and locked it. "Okay," she said. "Now listen. That manifold is not a casting, not a normal one. Look at the inside of the runners with a bore scope, and if you see what I think you're going to see, do not tell anybody for at least a week, because there are maybe 4 people alive who would understand what they're looking at, and 2 of them would lie to you about it." "What am I going to see, Ethan?" she exhaled. "You're going to see that nobody poured that. Somebody grew it." He put the phone down on the fender and stood there. At 9:15, somebody knocked on the shop door. Ethan expected a customer. He got a man in a very good coat holding a briefcase with both hands like it might get away. "Mr. Carter, Douglas Farrow. I represent the Sterling estate." That was fast. "May I come in?" "No." Farrow blinked. He was not a man who got told no in doorways. "Mr. Carter, I'm here in good faith. You're here at 9 in the morning on a Sunday, sir. Nobody drives 90 minutes on a Sunday in good faith." Ethan leaned in the doorframe. "Say what you came to say." Farrow opened the briefcase against his own knee, which cost him some dignity, and produced a single page. "Ms. Sterling has authorized me to offer you $45,000 to rescind yesterday's transfer." Ethan looked at the page. $45,000. He had $2,100 in the business account. He had a mortgage that was 51 days behind, and a letter from the bank in his desk drawer that he had not opened because he already knew what the 3rd paragraph said. $45,000 was everything. "No," Ethan said. Farrow actually laughed. "Mr. Carter, I don't think you understand. That's cash today, wired before noon for a vehicle you acquired for $1 in a moment of frankly emotional volatility on the part of my client." "You're right. I don't understand." Ethan's voice stayed flat. "Yesterday it was worthless. Today it's worth 45 grand. Which day was your client lying?" Farrow's jaw tightened. 60. "Get off my property." "Mr. Carter, be reasonable." "Sir, I am being extremely reasonable. If I was being unreasonable, I would be asking you why an estate that couldn't find a single tow truck for me yesterday found my address by breakfast." Farrow's face did something then, just for a second, and Ethan filed it away. "They know," Ethan said slowly. "Don't they? Somebody over there already knows what it is." 65,000? "Goodbye, Mr. Farrow." He closed the door and locked it and stood with his back against it and his heart going like a hammer, and he did not move for a long time. At 9:50, Sam said from the stairs, "Was that a lot of money?" "Yeah, bud." "Are we okay?" And Ethan Carter, who had never once lied to his son, said, "I don't know yet." He got the bore scope at 11 from the guy who ran the machine shop on 3rd, and who owed him a favor from a transmission in March. He fed it into the number 3 runner at 12:40. He looked at the screen for a while. Then he went and sat on the floor with his back against the tire. Priya picked up on the first ring. "Well, there's no core mark," Ethan said. "There's no parting line. There's no draft angle. Priya, the wall thickness changes along the runner. It gets thinner where the flow's fastest." "Say the rest of it." "There's a lattice." "Say it." "There's an internal lattice structure inside a manifold that was built no later than 1979, and I have no idea how it got in there because the process that makes that didn't exist until about 2013. Silence on the line. "Priya." "I'm here. Tell me I'm wrong." "Ethan." Her voice was very careful. "In 1978, there were 3 programs in this country working on directed metal deposition. 2 were defense. 1 was private. It was in Ohio, and it burned to the ground in April of 1980 with all its documentation inside, and every engineer who worked on it signed an agreement, and it has been a footnote ever since." She paused. "The name of the private one was Meridian Works." "Never heard of it." "Nobody has. That's the point." Another pause. Ethan, if that's a Meridian car, you are not sitting in a garage with an old vehicle. You are sitting in a garage with the only physical evidence that a piece of American manufacturing history happened 30 years before everyone believes it happened. He looked up at the underside of the fender. "How much?" he said. "How much what?" "Priya. How much is it worth?" "I have no idea," she said. "And neither does anybody else. And that is exactly what makes it dangerous. Lock your doors." He locked his doors. That night at 8:50, he took the journal out of the safe. He put Sam to bed first. He made coffee. He sat down with a legal pad because he was the kind of man who took notes on things that frightened him. And he opened Arthur Sterling's journal past the first page and started to read. The handwriting on the second page was younger, faster, angrier. "I am not sorry," it said again at the top, like the man had needed to write it twice to make it stick. "I am not sorry I signed. Frank can hate me from whatever bench he is sitting on. Somebody had to keep 41 people employed, and it was never going to be him." Ethan wrote on his legal pad, "Frank." He read for 2 hours. He learned that in 1977 there had been 2 men, and one of them was named Arthur Sterling, and he was 29 years old, and he ran a machine shop with a bad roof. And the other one was named Frank Mercer, and he was 52, and he had hands like a bear, and a mind that Arthur described 3 separate times, in 3 separate years, with the same phrase, "the only truly original mind I have ever stood next to." He learned that Frank Mercer had an idea about building metal up instead of cutting it away, and that everybody told him it was impossible, and that Arthur Sterling had been the only person in the state of Ohio who said, "Okay, let's try." He learned that Meridian Works had 11 employees in 1977 and 41 in 1979. He learned that they built one car, not to sell, to prove. Frank called it the argument because he said, "You cannot argue with people who have money. You can only build a thing they cannot explain and hand it to them." And he learned that on March 4, 1980, a consortium had come to Arthur Sterling with a contract, and the contract bought the process, and the contract required that the process be shelved for 11 years, so it would not compete with tooling those men had already paid for. Arthur signed it. Frank did not know until after. Ethan set the book down at 10:40 and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "Oh, you idiot," he said quietly to a dead man. "You sold your friend's life's work." There was a page after that with nothing on it but a date and one line. April 19th, 1980. It burned. They are saying it was the wiring. It was not the wiring. Ethan read that line 11 times. Then he flipped forward and found the pages had changed. The handwriting had gone tight and small the way people write when they are trying to stay calm. He never said one word to me. He came in, he looked at me. He put his keys on my desk, and he walked out into the parking lot. And Ruth says he drove to his brother's in Michigan, and he did not speak for 6 days. And then 4 pages later in October of 1981, I drove up to Marquette. He would not open the door. I stood on that porch for 1 hour and 40 minutes in the rain like a fool with a check in my coat, and he would not open the door. Finally, he spoke to me through it. He said, "Arthur, take the car." I said, "I do not want the car." He said, "I know you don't. That's why you're going to keep it." He said, "You keep it running, and when you have raised somebody who can look at it and see what it is instead of what it's worth, you give it to them and then we're square. Not before." He said, "That's the price, Arthur." Then he went upstairs and I heard the water running and I drove home. Ethan sat back in his chair. He said out loud in an empty garage at 11 o'clock at night, "That's the promise." He read the journal until 1:30 in the morning, and what he found in there was not what he expected because it was not a rich man's diary. There were no yachts in it. There were 30 years of the first Sunday of every month, and on almost every one of those Sundays, Arthur Sterling had written one paragraph, and most of them were short, and most of them were about his daughter. Olivia is 4. She gave her sandwich to a boy at the park. I do not know where she got that. Not from me. Olivia is 11, reported a girl for cheating, cried about it after. Ruth says leave her be. I think Ruth is right. Olivia is 16. Told a waiter he was slow in front of me. I said nothing. I should have said something. Frank would have said something. Olivia is 22. She is very good at this. She is better at the numbers than I was at her age. Started the car. It sounded fine. I am not sure I am doing this correctly. Olivia is 26. I have made a great deal of money, and I have taught her exactly one thing, which is how to be certain. She is certain about everything. I did that. Olivia is 28. Told her about Frank tonight over dinner. She said, "Dad, that was 50 years ago, and every company has a story like that, and it's why you could afford my school." She was being kind. She was trying to make me feel better. It was the worst thing anybody has ever said to me, and she meant it as a comfort. Ethan closed the book gently. "Well," he said, "now I know why you never drove it." Monday came at him hard. At 7:40 in the morning, Sam came out of the bathroom already dressed and said, "I don't want to go to school." "Why not?" "No reason." "Sam." The boy looked at the floor. Kayla Whitfield's mom was at the auction. Ethan put down the coffee. "And?" "There's a video." "A video of what?" "Of you." Sam's voice went thin. "Somebody put it on Facebook, and it's got a lot of comments, and Kayla said her mom said you were pathetic." Ethan stood very still. "Show me," he said. It was 51 seconds long. It started right as Olivia raised her voice to the crowd. It caught the clipboard and the dollar bill, and it caught the keys hitting his chest, and it caught the laugh, and the person filming had zoomed in on Ethan's face when he knelt down in the gravel, and somebody had written across the bottom in white letters, "When you'll do anything for a free car." 19,000 views. Ethan handed the phone back. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Yeah, get your bag. Dad, they're going to say things?" "They are." Ethan crouched down in the kitchen the same way he had crouched in the field on Saturday. "So here's what you say back. You ready? You say my dad's a mechanic, and he was right, and we'll see. That's it. That's it. 4 words at the end. We'll see. You know why that one works. Why? Because it's the only thing you can say to a person that they can't argue with." He picked up the boy's backpack and held it out. "And because it happens to be true." At 9 that morning, the phone in the shop rang and a voice said, "Mr. Carter, my name is Vincent Cole. I'm a private collector. I'm currently in Columbus, and I'd very much like to be at your shop in 90 minutes. How'd you get this number?" "The same way I get everything, sir. I paid for it." Cole arrived at 10:20 in a black Suburban with a driver, and he was maybe 60, and he was pleasant in the way that expensive men are pleasant, which is to say he complimented the building. "This is a real shop," he said. "I like a real shop." "Mr. Cole." "Vincent." "Mr. Cole, what's your offer?" Cole smiled. "Straight to it. Good." He put a card on the workbench. $200,000 today, and I'll take it as it sits, and I'll pay the transport, and you'll never hear from the Sterling family or their lawyers again, because that becomes my problem instead of yours. Ethan looked at the card. $200,000. He thought about the letter in the drawer he hadn't opened. He thought about Sam getting on the bus that morning with his shoulders up around his ears. "Can I ask you a question, sir?" "Please." "Why 200? Cole's smile didn't change. "It's a fair number." "No, sir, it isn't. It's a fast number." Ethan wiped his hands on the rag. "A fair number takes 3 weeks and 4 experts. A fast number gets signed before the seller knows what he's got." He set the rag down. "You flew here Sunday night, Mr. Cole. Nobody flies Sunday night for a fair number." The smile went away, and what was underneath it was much more honest, and Ethan respected it more. $350, Cole said. "No. $500,000, Mr. Carter. Cash. And I will tell you plainly, that is more money than this building and everything in it has earned in its entire existence." "That's true." "Then take it." "No, sir." Cole stared at him. "Why?" And Ethan Carter, standing in a shop with a mortgage 53 days behind, said something he did not fully understand until it was already out of his mouth. Because I gave a man my word before I knew I was giving it, he said. And I need to find out what I promised. Cole picked up his card. He looked at it for a second, and then he set it back down. Keep it, he said. You'll call me in 6 weeks and I'll answer, and I want you to remember that I was polite. He walked to the door and turned around. One piece of advice free. There are people coming behind me who will not be polite. Get it insured, and get it photographed, and get a lawyer who isn't from your town. The Suburban pulled out at 10:41. At 2 that afternoon, Ethan started stripping the interior. He had not planned to. He had planned to spend the week on the drivetrain. But he kept thinking about the way the book had slid out from under that seat after 30 years, and about a man who wrote 1 paragraph a month for 3 decades and never once wrote where he kept his hands, and at 2 o'clock he pulled the passenger seat entirely. At 2:50, he found it. The transmission tunnel had a panel on it that was not a factory panel. It was held by 6 screws, and 5 of them had never been turned, and the 6th had been turned so many times the slot was chewed. Ethan sat back on his heels. 6th screw, he said. You lazy old man. You only ever opened 1 corner. He backed all 6 out. Inside the tunnel, in a steel box lined with felt, sealed with a strip of black tape gone gray and brittle, was everything. There were photographs, 40 or 50 of them black and white, most of them of the same 11 men standing in front of a building with a hand-painted sign, and one of them of a big man with enormous hands laughing, holding up something that looked like a lump of scrap metal, like it was a newborn baby. There were letters, 19 of them, all addressed to Frank Mercer at an address in Marquette, Michigan, and every single one of them was unopened, and every single one of them had returned to sender written across the front in a different hand. There were drawings, rolled tight brittle at the edges, hand-inked. Ethan unrolled 1 2 inches and saw a cross-section of a manifold runner with a lattice inside it, dimensioned, dated September 11th, 1978. And he rolled it back up because his hands were sweating and he did not trust himself with it. And under all of that, at the bottom of the box, there was an envelope. It was newer than everything else. Not old, not brittle. The paper was white. On the front of it, in a hand that had gotten shakier since 1981, but was unmistakably the same, it said, "To whoever starts her, after I can't." Ethan Carter sat on the floor of his garage holding it and did not open it, and he could not have told anybody why. At 4:30, the phone rang. Carter Restoration. Mr. Carter. A woman's voice, brisk, young. My name is Dana Ochoa. I'm a reporter with the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I'm calling about a video. Ethan closed his eyes. I don't have a comment about the video. I don't want a comment about the video. I want to ask you about the car. Papers rustled. Sir, I've had 4 phone calls today from people who don't normally call newspapers. A guy from a museum in Detroit, an appraiser in Chicago who wouldn't give me his last name, and a woman in Pennsylvania who told me that if there is a running Meridian prototype in a garage in Millbrook, Ohio, then somebody has been lying to the Society of Automotive Engineers for 46 years. She paused. So, is there... Ethan looked across the shop at the car. Ms. Ochoa, he said. Can I call you back tomorrow? You can call me back tomorrow. But sir, I'd like to say one thing first, and then I'll let you go. Go ahead. I watched that video 11 times before I called you. Her voice changed. Everybody else is watching the woman. I was watching your kid's face. That's why I'm calling. She hung up. At 6 that evening, Walt Hendricks pulled into the lot in a pickup older than Ethan's. He came in without knocking, which Ethan found he did not mind at all, and he stopped 4 feet inside the door when he saw the box open on the floor and the photographs laid out on the bench. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he walked over slow and picked up one photograph, and his big weathered hand started shaking. That's Frank, he said. Ethan looked up. You knew him. Knew him. Walt laughed, and it came out wrong, and he had to stop and get himself together. Son Frank Mercer gave me my first job. I was 17. I swept his floor for a year and he taught me to weld out of pure spite because I was terrible at it. He set the photo down carefully. When Meridian went, I got hired by Arthur about a year later. Took the man's money for 31 years. Did Arthur know that you knew Frank? Course he knew. That's why he hired me. Walt's mouth twisted. That was the whole point. Man hired himself a reminder and paid it a salary and made it mow his grass. Ethan sat down on the stool. Walt, is Frank Mercer alive? The old man looked at him. Now that, Walt said slowly, is a very interesting question. And I'll tell you something strange. 16 days ago, I stood at Arthur Sterling's funeral, and I counted the room because that's what you do at my age. And in the back, standing up, not sitting there, was a man about 90 years old in a brown coat, and he did not talk to one single soul, and he left before the end. Ethan stood up. Walt? I know. Walt, did you see his hands? And Walt Hendricks looked at the photograph on the bench at the big man laughing with a lump of metal held up like a newborn. And then he looked back at Ethan, and his eyes were wet, and he said, Son, I have not been able to think about anything else for 2 weeks. It was 6:40 on Monday evening when Walt Hendricks sat down on an upturned bucket in the middle of Ethan Carter's shop and put his face in his hands for a minute, and Ethan let him. I could be wrong, Walt said finally. Man's got to be 91, 92. You're not wrong. You don't know that. No, Ethan said. But you do. Walt lifted his head. I do. Then let's go find him. Son, if Frank Mercer wanted to be found, do you think he'd have spent 46 years not being found? Walt wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He watched them bury the man, and he didn't stay for the end of it. That's not a fella waiting for a phone call. Then why'd he come at all? Walt didn't have an answer for that. At 8:15 that night, Ethan sat at the desk with the phone in his hand and a legal pad in front of him with the word Marquette written on it and circled 3 times. He called 11 Mercers in the Upper Peninsula. 9 didn't answer. One was a woman who told him she'd been getting calls for a Frank Mercer for 30 years and she was tired of it and hung up. The 11th was a man who listened to Ethan's whole introduction without saying a word. Sir, Ethan said. Are you still there? Who told you that name? A man named Walt Hendricks. There was a silence long enough that Ethan checked the screen. Walt's alive, the man said. He is. He's standing about 9 feet from me. Huh. Another pause. I'm not who you're looking for. I'm his nephew. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told the last 2 people who called, which is that my uncle is a private man, and if you're calling about a car, you can stop. Ethan's grip tightened. The last 2 people. Since Friday. Sir, who called you? Fella from a law office and a fella who wouldn't say where he was from and asked me twice what my uncle had in his house. The man's voice hardened. You got a name for the second one. Ethan looked across the shop at a business card sitting on the workbench. Yeah, he said. I think I might. At 9:10, Ethan called Dana Ochoa back a day early. That was fast, she said. Ms. Ochoa, I want to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Shoot. If I tell you what's in my garage and you print it, what happens? Honestly. She didn't hesitate. Your life gets a lot worse for about 2 weeks. That's the straight answer. That's the straight answer. Everybody with money will know your address by Thursday. Your kid gets asked about it at school. Somebody will say you stole it. She exhaled. And you'll never lose it. That's the trade. Once it's printed with your name on it, nobody can quietly make it belong to somebody else. Ethan looked at the steel box on the bench at 19 letters that had all come back unopened. What do you need from me? He said. Photographs. Access. And one thing you haven't told anybody. I've got 3 of those. Mr. Carter. He heard her sit up. How fast can I get to Millbrook? How fast can you drive? At 11:50 on Tuesday morning, a man named Douglas Farrow served Ethan Carter with a complaint on his own front step. Petition to void transfer, Farrow said. You'll want counsel. Ethan read the first page standing up. Duress and diminished capacity. My client was 16 days out from burying her father. Your client made me sign in front of 90 people. That's precisely the point, Mr. Carter. A person in a sound state of mind does not conduct a transaction that way. Farrow adjusted his coat. The estate is also filing to enjoin any alteration of the vehicle pending resolution, which means you don't turn one more bolt. Mr. Farrow? Ethan folded the papers in half. Can I ask you something? Off the record, off whatever. You can ask. Did she tell you to do this? Farrow's mouth moved before he stopped it, and Ethan Carter, who had spent 11 years reading gauges and 3 years reading customers, saw the whole thing. She doesn't know? He said. Does she? Mr. Carter, who's paying you? The estate. Who signs for the estate, sir? Because it isn't a 29-year-old woman who threw her father's keys in the gravel to make a crowd laugh. Somebody with a boardroom is paying you, and you came out here on a Sunday morning before she'd even had coffee. Ethan handed the papers back. You tell them I said something for me. I'm not a messenger. You're standing on my steps at 11 in the morning, sir. You're exactly a messenger. Ethan opened the door. Tell them the box was already opened. Farrow went white. He actually went white, and he tried to cover it, and he failed, and he was in his car in under 20 seconds. Ethan stood there a long time. Huh, he said. At 2 that afternoon, he called Priya Raman. I got sued, he said. Good. Priya, no, listen to me. Lawsuits are slow and they're public and they have dockets. Somebody just put this in writing. That's the best thing that's happened to you. Paper shuffled. Now, are you sitting down? No. Sit down. He sat down on the fender of his truck. I made 3 phone calls, Priya said. I made them very carefully. Ethan, there is a verification group out of Stuttgart. They do provenance metallurgy. They authenticate for museums and for insurers, and they are the only people on earth who both understand what you have and have nothing to gain by lying about it. A pause. They want to be there Friday. This Friday. They're already booked. 3 of them. They booked before I finished asking. Ethan put his hand over his eyes. Ethan, there's a court order coming that says I can't touch it. Then don't touch it. Let them touch it. She let that sit. One more thing and you're not going to like it. They asked me a question I couldn't answer, and it's the same question they'll ask you Friday, and you need to think about it before then. What's the question? They asked whether the vehicle has ever been started since 1980. She paused. Because if it has the wear signature, changes everything about how they date the components. And Ethan, if a man ran that engine once a month for 30 years, that engine has about 600 cold starts on it and 6 miles on the clock, and there is not a single other object in the world that looks like that. Ethan sat on his own fender in his own parking lot. Priya, he said, it's not a car. No, it's a heartbeat. That's a little dramatic for you. Yeah, well. He laughed, and it came out shaky. It's been a week. The break-in happened at 3:50 on Wednesday morning. Ethan woke because Sam woke, and Sam woke because the dog 3 doors down was going insane, and Ethan came down the interior stairs into the shop in his bare feet with a 4-foot pry bar in his hand and found the side door standing open and a cold draft coming through it. They hadn't taken this car. You cannot take a car in the dark without a truck. They had taken the workbench apart. Drawers pulled, boxes dumped. The borescope on the floor with its screen cracked, and the felt-lined steel box was on its side in the middle of the concrete with the lid open and every single thing gone out of it. Ethan stood there with the pry bar hanging from his hand. Dad. Sam was on the stairs. Dad, don't. Go back up. Dad. Sam, upstairs. Now. The sheriff's deputy got there at 4:25 and wrote for 11 minutes and said the words, no forced entry, which meant they'd had a key or they'd had skill and that he'd be in touch, and both men in that room knew what that meant. At 5 in the morning, Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the tire, in the exact spot he'd sat on Sunday, and did not move until the sky changed. At 6:10, he got up, went to the office, spun the dial on the gun safe he used for customer titles, and opened it. Inside was a leather book wrapped twice around with a bootlace. 19 unopened letters, 4 rolled drawings, 41 photographs, and a white envelope that said, "To whoever starts her after I can't." Ethan put his forehead against the cold steel door of that safe and let out a breath he'd been holding since Sunday night. "Well," he said, "thank God for boring men." He'd moved it all Monday evening. He'd left the empty box on the bench because he was too tired to put it away. And that laziness had just saved 46 years of American history. At 7:15 he called Dana Ochoa. "They broke into my shop," he said. "Are you okay? Is your son okay?" "We're fine." "Did they get it?" "They got a box." Dana Ochoa said a word Ethan hadn't expected from her, and then she said, "I'm 40 minutes out. Don't clean anything up. Don't touch the door. I'm bringing a photographer." "Ms. Ochoa." "Yeah." "You said you needed one thing I hadn't told anybody." "I did." "Come look at the odometer." The story ran Thursday morning. Ethan didn't read it. He couldn't. He handed the paper to Walt Hendricks at 8 o'clock and went and stood in the doorway with his coffee while the old man read it, standing up in the middle of the shop with his lips moving. Walt got about halfway and said, "Oh, hell." "What?" "She put in the part about your boy." Ethan closed his eyes. "How bad?" "It ain't bad." Walt's voice had gone rough. "Son, it ain't bad at all." By 10 in the morning, the story was on 4 aggregators. By noon, a Detroit television station had a truck in Ethan's lot. By 2 in the afternoon, the 51-second video that said when you'll do anything for a free car had been reposted 11,000 times with a completely different caption, and the comments underneath it had turned all at once the way a crowd turns. At 2:40, Sam came home from school with a torn shirt and a cut over his eyebrow. Ethan sat him on the workbench and got the kit. "Talk." "Kayla's brother said you were a beggar." "What did you say?" "I said we'll see." "And then?" Sam looked at the floor. "And then he said it again, and I didn't say we'll see." Ethan cleaned the cut. He did not say anything for about 30 seconds. "Am I in trouble?" "You're in a little trouble," Ethan said. "Not for the reason you think." He tipped the boy's chin up. "You hit him because he called me a beggar." "Yeah." "Sam, listen. That word only works on you if some part of you is afraid it's true." He taped the gauze down. "You want to know how I know?" "Because Saturday when she threw those keys, I wasn't angry that she thought I was worthless. I was angry that for about 1 second standing in that garage with all those people looking at me, I wondered if she might be right." Sam stared at him. "You did. Everybody does. Anybody who tells you different is selling something." Ethan put the kit away. "So that's the work. That's the actual work, bud, and it's got nothing to do with fighting. You get to a place where somebody can say the word and it just lands on the floor." "Are you there?" Ethan thought about it honestly. "Getting closer," he said. "Come on, help me sweep up. We've got company tomorrow." They came in on Friday at 9 in the morning. 3 of them, and the youngest was 55, and they got out of a rental car in a gravel lot in Millbrook, Ohio, in wool coats, carrying 4 hard cases between them. The lead was a man named Klaus Reinhardt, and he shook Ethan's hand with both of his and said, "Mr. Carter, thank you for the telephone photographs. I did not sleep." "Neither did I." "Good. Then we are honest men." He looked past Ethan into the shop. "May we—" "There's a court order says I can't alter it. We alter nothing." Reinhardt was already walking. "We only look." They looked for 4 hours without speaking to Ethan once. He'd been warned about that by Priya, and it still nearly killed him. He made coffee, nobody drank. He rearranged tools that didn't need it. Walt sat on the bucket and didn't move. Dana Ochoa stood in the corner with her arms folded and her notebook shut because she'd figured out inside 10 minutes that this was not a story you interrupted. At 12:40, the youngest German went out to the car and came back with a fourth case that he handled differently than the others. At 1:15, Reinhardt said in German one short sentence. Nobody translated it. Nobody needed to. At 1:50, they opened the hood. They had put it off. Ethan understood later that they had put it off on purpose, the way you save something. And when the second man got the prop rod in and stepped back, the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder and looked into that engine bay for a long time without any of them saying anything at all. Then Klaus Reinhardt, who had authenticated for 2 national museums and had once told a Swiss insurer to his face that a car was fake in front of the man who owned it, put one hand on the fender to steady himself and started to cry. Walt Hendricks stood up off the bucket. Ethan did not move. Reinhardt took his glasses off and wiped them and put them back on and said without turning around, "Mr. Carter, please come here." Ethan came. "You see this weld?" "Yes, sir." "Tell me what you see." "Every 11th bead's a hair wide," Ethan said, "because his hand got tired." Reinhardt nodded slowly. "For 31 years, he said, I have looked at objects and asked, is it real? This is the first time in my life I have looked at an object and thought it should not be real." He turned around. "Do you understand what I am telling you? This process does not appear in the literature until 2011. There is no paper. There is no patent. There is nothing. And this man did it in a building with a bad roof in Ohio in 1978. And then it stopped, and everyone forgot. And the world spent 30 years reinventing what he had already finished." "Why did it stop?" Dana Ochoa said from the corner. Reinhardt looked at Ethan. "That," he said, "is not a metallurgy question." At 3 that afternoon, Ethan brought the drawings out. He carried them across the shop in a cardboard tube, and he set them on the bench, and the 3 Germans came around it like men approaching an animal. Reinhardt unrolled the first one 2 inches, saw the date, and stopped. "No," he said. "Yes, sir. No." He said something fast to the other 2. One of them sat down on the floor, actually sat down on the concrete in a wool coat. "Mr. Carter, where has this been?" "Inside the transmission tunnel, 6 screws. Only one of them ever got turned." "For how long?" 46 years. Reinhardt put both hands flat on the bench. "Mr. Carter," he said, "the vehicle is extraordinary. The vehicle will make headlines, but you must understand me now because I will only be this clear one time." He tapped the tube. "This is more important than the vehicle. The vehicle is a beautiful object. This is evidence. This is dated, witnessed, inked evidence that a private American company solved a manufacturing problem in 1978, and that the solution was then, for some reason, taken out of the world." The shop went very quiet. "Somebody knows that," Ethan said. "Yes. Somebody tried to take it out of my building 3 nights ago." Reinhardt looked at him for a long moment. "Then I would suggest," he said, "that you stop keeping it in your building." At 5:15, Ethan Carter drove to a bank in Columbus with Dana Ochoa in the passenger seat and Walt Hendricks following in his truck, and he put 19 unopened letters, 41 photographs, 4 drawings, 1 leather journal, and 1 white envelope into a safe deposit box, under a name that was not his. He kept the key on the same ring as the keys Olivia Sterling had thrown at his chest. On Saturday at 11 in the morning, Vincent Cole called. "Mr. Carter?" "Mr. Cole, I'd like to make you an offer. You're going to have to do better than 500. I'm not calling about the car." A pause. "I'm calling about a box." Ethan stood up out of his chair. "Say that again." "I said I'm calling about a box, and I'm going to be very careful now because I don't know who's listening to either of us." Cole's voice was flat and tired, and completely without the charm he'd worn into that shop on Sunday. "Mr. Carter, I do not employ people who break into buildings. I want that on the record between us. But I do work for people who employ people who do, and on Wednesday morning, I found out I'd been used as a scout, and I have spent 3 days deciding whether I care. And turns out I care." A long breath. The consortium that bought the Meridian process in 1980 no longer exists under that name. It went through 4 mergers. What it is now is a company you've heard of, and their tooling division has spent the last 14 years litigating additive manufacturing patents on the theory that nothing predates 2009. He paused. Do you understand what your drawings do to them? Ethan sat back down. They make everything they've won worthless. They make 40 years of it worthless, and they make one line item in a 1980 contract look extremely deliberate. Cole let that sit. That's what's in your garage, sir. Everybody's talking about a $9 million car. Nobody's saying the real number out loud. Which is what? Which is the reason a man kept a fire safe box screwed shut inside a transmission tunnel for 30 years instead of putting it in a bank. Cole's voice dropped. Arthur Sterling wasn't hiding treasure, Mr. Carter. He was hiding a confession. Ethan closed his eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I was polite, Vincent Cole said, and I'd like it to have meant something. And he hung up. The number came out on Tuesday. It came out because the Germans filed their preliminary with an insurer, and the insurer needed a figure, and a figure that specific does not stay in a building. $9 million. By Wednesday morning, it was everywhere. It was on the morning shows. It was on the crawl. A man in a Millbrook, Ohio garage had been handed a rusted car as a joke at a Billionaires estate sale in front of 200 laughing guests. And the car was the only surviving prototype of a program the industry had spent 46 years insisting never got that far, and the estimate was $9 million, and there was 51 seconds of video of the moment it was given away. They played the video every time. Every single time they played the part where the keys hit his chest, and the laugh, and the man in work boots getting down on one knee in the gravel in front of his 9-year-old son and saying, "Thank you, ma'am." At 8:40 on Wednesday morning, Ethan Carter opened the letter in his desk drawer that he'd been not opening for 51 days and read the 3rd paragraph and found it said exactly what he'd known it said. He put it in his shirt pocket anyway. "Why are you keeping that?" Sam asked. "Because in about a month I'm going to want to remember what this week felt like," Ethan said, "and I'm not going to be able to." At 4:10 that afternoon, a black car came up the drive of Carter Restoration and stopped and sat there with the engine running for a minute and a half. Walt saw it first. "Son, I see it. You want me to stay?" "No, sir." "You sure?" "Walt." Ethan wiped his hands on the rag and set it down. "Take Sam for ice cream." "It's 4 o'clock. "I'm aware of the time." The engine shut off. Olivia Sterling got out alone. No Pharaoh, no assistant. No coat that cost more than the truck in the lot. She had a folder under her arm, and she'd been crying somewhere between Sterling Ridge and Millbrook, and had stopped and fixed it, and it hadn't held. She stood in the middle of the lot like she'd forgotten how the last 10 feet worked. Ethan waited in the doorway. "Mr. Carter?" "Miss Sterling." "May I come in?" He thought about Sunday morning and a man named Pharaoh standing in his doorway, and the word no. He stepped back and held the door. She came 4 steps inside and stopped because the car was right there, and it had been washed, and it was sitting on a clean floor under good light for the first time in 46 years, and Olivia Sterling put her hand over her mouth. "Oh," she said. Ethan said nothing. "I've walked past that 1,000 times. Her voice came apart in the middle of it. "I used to eat lunch in that garage when I was 6 years old." "I know." She turned on him. "How would you know that? Oh, Ms. Sterling, why don't you say what you came to say?" She got herself together, and she opened the folder, and her hands were not steady. "I've withdrawn the petition, as of 11 this morning. It was filed without my knowledge by our general counsel at the request of 2 members of the board, and I want you to know that I have spent 4 days finding that out, and I did not enjoy any of it." She pulled a page out. "I'm also aware that your shop was broken into. I did not authorize that. I have no evidence about who did, and I am not going to pretend I do." "Okay. That's it. Okay. You said what happened. I believe you." Ethan leaned against the bench. "What's the other paper?" Olivia's jaw tightened. It's an offer. There it is. Mr. Carter, please. She held it out. $9 million is the auction estimate. Estimates on unique objects are guesses. I'm offering you 11 wired, no contingency, no appraisal. And I will pay every cost of the transfer, and I will indemnify you against any claim from anyone forever, including the people you're worried about. And I have the ability to actually do that, which nobody else who's called you does. Ethan looked at the paper without taking it. $11 million. Yes. For a car you told 200 people was worthless. Yes. Her voice cracked. Yes, I did that. Ms. Sterling, why do you want it? Because it's my father's. No, ma'am. Ethan straightened up off the bench. It was your father's for 30 years and you didn't put it in the catalog. You said it wasn't worth the cost of moving it. So that's not the reason, and we both know it. And I've had a very long week, so I'd appreciate it if you'd just tell me the truth. Olivia Sterling stood in the middle of a mechanic's shop with $11 million in her hand and started to shake. Because I can't fix it, she said. Fix what? Any of it. The words came out of her like something tearing. He's dead. I can't call him. I can't take it back. There is a video of me, Mr. Carter, and my father is in the ground, and there are 900,000 people who now know exactly what kind of person he raised, and I cannot fix a single second of it. But I can buy the car. She was crying openly now and not bothering to stop. I can buy the car and put it back in that garage where he had it, and at least it will be where he wanted it, and that is the only thing left in the entire world that I am still able to do. The shop was quiet for a long moment. Ethan Carter walked past her and pulled a stool out from under the bench and set it down behind her. Sit down, he said. I don't want to sit down. Ms. Sterling, you've been standing since 11 o'clock this morning. Sit down. She sat down. He handed her the rag off the bench because it was the only clean cloth in the building, and she looked at it and laughed once horribly and used it. You're not going to sell it to me, she said. No, ma'am. Can I ask why is it the money? Because I'll go higher. I'll go to 15. It isn't the money. Then what? And Ethan Carter pulled up the second stool and sat down 4 feet in front of her and put his elbows on his knees and asked her the only question that had mattered since a bootlace came untied in his office at 11 minutes past 10 on a Saturday night. Ms. Sterling, he said, your father started that engine at 7 in the morning on the first Sunday of every month for 30 years. Rain. Snow. Christmas. He never drove it. Not 1 inch. There are 6 miles on that odometer and 600 cold starts on that engine. And he locked the door behind him every single time, and then he couldn't talk to anybody until noon. Olivia stopped breathing. So before you write me a check, Ethan said quietly, I want you to answer one thing, and I want you to actually think about it because I have thought about almost nothing else for 11 days. What? She whispered. Why did a man with $4 billion spend 30 years protecting a car he refused to drive? And Olivia Sterling opened her mouth to answer him, and found that she had absolutely no idea. It was 4:31 on Wednesday afternoon when Olivia Sterling finally said, I don't know. I believe you. That's the honest answer. I don't know. She wiped her face with a mechanic's rag and looked at it. I've been telling reporters for a week that I understood my father, and I don't know why he started a car he never drove. Nobody does, Ethan said. That's the whole problem. You do. I know part of it. How? And here was the place. Ethan had thought about this moment for 11 days, and he'd built 5 different versions of it in his head, and every one of them ended with him being right and her being sorry, and standing there in his own shop, he discovered he didn't want a single one of them. Ms. Sterling, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to give you a choice. All right. When I pulled the passenger seat out of that car, there was a book wedged under it. It's your father's. He wrote in it once a month for 30 years. He watched her face. It was in the car when you gave me the car. Legally, it's mine. I want you to understand that I know that, and that it doesn't matter to me even a little bit. Olivia had gone completely still. There's more, Ethan said. "There's a steel box in the transmission tunnel. Photographs, drawings, 19 letters he wrote and never got to send. And there's an envelope he wrote sometime near the end, and it's addressed to whoever starts her after I can't, and I've had it 11 days and I have not opened it." "Why not?" "Because it isn't for me." He paused. "Or it might be. I honestly don't know yet." She stood up off the stool. "Where is it?" "In a bank in Columbus." "Take me there. That's the choice." Ethan didn't move. "Ms. Sterling, if you go get in that car and drive to Columbus with me right now, I'll open that safe deposit box and we'll read the whole thing out loud, both of us, and I will not skip one line. Not the ones about the company. Not the ones about you." Olivia's chin came up. "There are lines about me. There are a lot of lines about you. Are they bad? Some of them?" She breathed out. "And the other option? The other option is you go home. I'll photocopy the pages that are only about your family, and I'll mail them to you, and you'll never have to hear the rest of it, and you can remember him the way you want to." Ethan picked up his keys off the bench. "Ms. Sterling, I've buried somebody. I'm not going to pretend that's not a real option. Some people can't carry the whole thing, and there's no shame in it." She looked at the car for a long moment. "My father," she said, "spent 30 years, and I got about 4 hours a month of him that I never understood." "Yeah. I'll take the whole thing." They were in the bank at 6:10. They were back in the shop at 7:40, and Walt Hendricks had brought Sam home and put a frozen pizza in the toaster oven like a man diffusing something. And when Olivia Sterling walked in behind Ethan carrying a leather book against her chest, Walt stood up so fast the bucket went over. "Ms. Sterling." "Walt." Her voice went strange. "Walt, I didn't know you were here." "Well." He picked the bucket up. "I've been here since Saturday near enough." "You worked for my father for 31 years. "Yes, ma'am." "I never once asked you your last name." Walt looked at the floor. "Hendricks," he said. "Walt Hendricks." She nodded slowly and her mouth was shaking. "I'm going to remember that." Sam came out of the stairwell with pizza in his hand and stopped dead. Everybody in that room understood at once exactly who was standing 11 feet from whom. Ethan said quietly, "Sam?" The boy looked at his father. Then he looked at the woman who had thrown keys at his father's chest in front of 200 laughing people. And Olivia Sterling looked back at him, and she did not look away, which was the only thing in that entire moment that she got right, and she knew it. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's not enough. I know that. But I've been trying to think of a bigger word for 4 days, and there isn't one." Sam thought about it. "Are you here to buy the car?" "I was." "Are you still—" Olivia looked at the book in her arms. "I don't know yet," she said. "Okay." Sam took a bite of pizza. "You can sit on the good stool, the other one wobbles." And that, Ethan would tell people years later, was the first time he understood his son was going to be a better man than he was. They started reading at 8:15. Ethan read the first pages out loud because Olivia asked him to, and she sat on the good stool with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she never drank. And when he got to the 4 words on the first page, "I am not sorry," she made a sound like she'd been hit. "That's his handwriting." "Yes, ma'am. He wrote that at 29. About that. I'm 29. "I know," Ethan said. "I did the math on Sunday." He read her Frank Mercer. He read her the shop with the bad roof, and the 11 employees, and the 41, and the man with hands like a bear who Arthur described 3 separate times across 3 separate years, with the exact same phrase, the only truly original mind I have ever stood next to. He read her the argument the car built to prove a thing instead of sell it. He read her March 4th, 1980, and the consortium, and the contract, and the 11-year shelf clause, and Arthur signing it alone in a room while Frank Mercer was 90 miles away, teaching a 17-year-old kid to weld out of pure spite. Walt made a noise at that part, and went outside for a while. At 9:40, Ethan read April 19th, 1980. It burned. They are saying it was the wiring. It was not the wiring. Olivia set the coffee down. Read that again. He read it again. He knew, she said. He knew something. Mr. Carter, my father built a company out of nothing, and there was a fire that destroyed the only competitor to the process he'd just sold. Her voice had gone flat and businesslike, and Ethan realized this was what she sounded like when she was terrified. Do you understand what that sentence looks like? Do you understand what a journalist does with that sentence? Yes, ma'am. And you brought it out of a bank vault and read it to me in a garage. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because I told you I wouldn't skip anything, Ethan said. And because I don't think it means what you think it means. What do you think it means? I think we should keep reading. They kept reading. They read October of 1981, and the porch in Marquette, and 1 hour and 40 minutes in the rain, and a check in a coat pocket, and a door that never opened. Ethan read out the sentence, and had to stop halfway and start it over. He said, I know you don't. That's why you're going to keep it. He said you keep it running, and when you have raised somebody who can look at it and see what it is instead of what it's worth, you give it to them, and then we're square. Not before. He said, that's the price, Arthur. Olivia Sterling put both hands flat on the workbench and bent forward over it. Ms. Sterling, don't. Okay. Don't be kind to me right now. I can't hold it. She stayed there a long moment. Then she straightened up, and her face was wrecked, and she said, It's me. He was supposed to raise me, and then give me the car. Yes. And he never gave me the car. No. For 30 years he started that engine, and every single time he started it, he was measuring me, and every single time the answer was no. Her voice broke completely. He didn't drive it because he hadn't earned it. He hadn't paid the price. Because of me. Ethan let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to, and then he said, Ms. Sterling, come here and look at this. I don't want to. Come look at it anyway. She came. He had the journal open to a page in the middle, and he put his finger on a line. Olivia is 4. She gave her sandwich to a boy at the park. I do not know where she got that. Not from me. Olivia read it 3 times. That's not the writing of a man who thinks his daughter's a lost cause, Ethan said. I read every one of these. There's about 360 entries in here, and you're in more than half of them, and the man is not disappointed in you. He's frightened. Of what? Of what he was teaching you. Ethan turned the page. Here. Olivia is 26. I have made a great deal of money, and I have taught her exactly one thing, which is how to be certain. She is certain about everything. I did that. Olivia read it. Her mouth moved on the last 3 words. I did that, she said. He's not writing about your failure, ma'am. He's writing about his. That's worse. Yeah, Ethan said. It usually is. At 10:50 they got to the letters. 19 of them banded together, all addressed to Frank Mercer at an address in Marquette, Michigan. Everyone sealed, everyone stamped, everyone with return to sender written across the front. He wrote 19 times, Olivia said. In how long? Postmarks run from 1982 to 2016. 34 years. She fanned them out on the bench. And Frank Mercer sent back every one of them. Ethan didn't answer. She looked up. What? Ms. Sterling, hand me the top one. She handed it to him. He held it under the bench lamp and turned it so the light came across the ink at an angle, and then he handed it back. Look at the handwriting on the front. It says return to sender. Look at the address he wrote, then look at the words somebody wrote across it. Olivia looked. She looked for a long time. It's not the same person, she whispered. No, ma'am. It's a woman's hand. That's what I thought too. Look at the next one, and the one after. She went through all 19 fast, and her breathing changed. They're all the same hand, she said. All 19. 19 letters over 34 years, and the same person sent back every single one. She looked up with her eyes enormous. "Mr. Carter, if it isn't Frank?" "Then Frank never knew," Ethan said. "Then for 34 years, your father wrote to a man who never got a single word of it, and somebody in that house made sure of it, and both of those men died thinking the other one had nothing to say." Walt Hendricks spoke from the doorway, and neither of them had heard him come back in. "Ruth," he said. They turned. "Frank's daughter." Walt's voice was thick. "Not your mother, ma'am, different, Ruth. I know that's confusing. They were both Ruth. Half the women born in 1929 were Ruth." He came into the light. "Frank had a girl. She'd have been about 30 in '82. Moved him in after his wife passed. Handled everything." "Walt," Ethan said. "Is she alive?" "No. Cancer maybe 8-9 years back. I heard it secondhand." Olivia sat down hard on the good stool. "So there's a nephew," Ethan said slowly. "There's a nephew in Marquette who told me on the phone Monday night that his uncle is a private man, and if I'm calling about a car, I can stop." Olivia's head came up. "Say that again." "His uncle," Ethan said. Present tense. They looked at each other across a workbench with 19 unopened letters lying between them. "Oh my God," Olivia Sterling said. "He's alive." They left at 4:15 in the morning. Sam came because Ethan was not leaving that boy in a building that had already been broken into once, and Walt came because he'd have laid down in the driveway otherwise, and Olivia drove because she had the only vehicle with 4 working seats. 9 hours to Marquette. Somewhere around Grand Rapids at about 8:40 in the morning, with Sam asleep against Walt's shoulder in the back, Olivia said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you take the 11 million? Ethan looked out the window for a while. 11 years ago, I worked on a program in Huntsville, he said. I wrote a report that said a component was going to fail. It wasn't dramatic. It was 4 pages and a graph. And a program manager took me into a conference room with 6 other men and asked me if I was certain, and I said yes. And he said, "Ethan, everybody in this room has a mortgage." What happened? I didn't sit down. Ethan turned his hands over in his lap. And they buried the report, and 8 months later it failed on a test stand, and nobody got hurt, which was luck. And by then, I'd been reassigned to a building where they didn't have a window. He shrugged. I quit. Sarah was pregnant. I told her I did the right thing, and I believed it for about 2 years. And then it just cost and cost and cost. He watched the road. She got sick. We had insurance for a while, and then we had worse insurance, and I sat in a chair in a hospital in Columbus doing arithmetic about a job I'd quit for a principal nobody had ever thanked me for. He was quiet a second. Ms. Sterling, when you threw those keys at me, I signed that paper because I was done losing on principle. That's the truth. I took the humiliation on purpose because I wanted something out of that day. And now you're turning down $11 million. Yeah. So what changed? Ethan thought about it honestly because she deserved the honest one. I found out it wasn't mine to sell, he said. The house was small and green, and there was a ramp built onto the front steps by somebody who wasn't a carpenter. Walt went up first because Walt insisted and knocked, and a man in his 50s opened the door and looked at all of them standing in the yard, and his face closed like a fist. No, he said. Sir? You're the guy from Ohio. I told you on the phone. You did, Ethan said. Sir, my name's Ethan Carter. This is my son Sam. This is Walt Hendricks, who swept your uncle's floor in 1976, and this is Olivia Sterling. The man's eyes moved to Olivia and stopped. Sterling? Yes. Arthur Sterling's girl. Yes. Lady, you have got some nerve. I know, Olivia said. I have exactly one thing to say, and then we'll go if you want us to. Say it fast. She held up the letters. Your uncle wrote your grandfather off for 46 years, she said. And my father wrote him 19 times, and your Aunt Ruth sent every single one of them back without ever opening them, and I don't think he knows. and I have driven 9 hours to be a person I have never once been in my entire life, which is the person who tells the truth when it makes her look terrible. The man stared at the bundle in her hand. Ruth, he said. Yes, Ruth would have. His jaw worked. God help me, that's exactly what Ruth would have done. She hated him. She used to say the name Sterling like it was a diagnosis. He put his hand on the doorframe. He doesn't talk much, he said. He's 92. Some days he's not there. Some days he's more there than I am. Is today one of the good ones? Walt asked. The nephew looked at him. Today, he said. He's been sitting by the window since 6. Frank Mercer was in a chair by the window with a blanket over his knees and his hands folded on top of it, and the hands were the hands from the photograph, and they were the biggest hands Ethan Carter had ever seen on a human being. He looked at the 4 of them come in. His eyes went past Ethan, past Sam, past Olivia, and stopped on Walt. Well, Frank Mercer said, you still can't weld. Walt Hendricks sat down on the floor of that living room, 71 years old, and cried like a boy. It took about 20 minutes to get through it. Then Frank looked at Olivia and said, You're his. Yes, sir. You've got his chin. Poor girl. Mr. Mercer, I'm here because... I know why you're here. He shifted in the chair. You're here because somebody finally started the car, and something fell out from under the seat. The room stopped. How do you know that? Ethan said. Frank Mercer looked at him for the first time. Because I'm the one who put it under there, he said. Nobody breathed. 1980, Frank said. April, night of the 19th. His voice was slow, but it did not wander. I drove that car out of the Meridian building at 9:40 at night, and I parked it at my brother-in-law's, and I walked back. Olivia said very quietly, Mr. Mercer, you want to know if I did it? He nodded. You should want to know. Everybody should have wanted to know, and not one soul ever asked me. Did you? Yes. Ethan felt the floor move. I burned my own shop, Frank Mercer said. I want that said out loud in a room with witnesses before I'm dead, and I'll tell you why, and then you can do whatever you want with it, because at 92, the worst they can do is give me a nicer bed. Frank, Walt said. He sold it. Frank's hands closed on the blanket. He sold the process to men who told me to my face in my own office with him standing there that they intended to put it in a drawer for 11 years so it wouldn't cost them their tooling. 11 years. And I said, gentlemen, in 11 years, I'll be 63, and one of them looked at his watch. So you burned it. I burned the drawings I'd left in the building. I burned the fixtures. I burned every piece of hardware they'd bought and hadn't collected yet, and the roof went, and I stood across that road and watched it, and I have not been sorry one single day. But the process, Ethan said. The drawings in the tunnel. You saved a set. I saved a set. Frank's eyes came up. And I put them in the one place on God's earth those men would never look, which was inside a car they'd already written off as scrap, and then I gave the car to the man who sold me out. Why? Olivia said. Why him? Because he was the only one who'd keep it. Frank said it like it was obvious. Girl, your father was the best man I ever knew for about 3 years, and then he was frightened for about 6 months, and then he was a coward for one afternoon, and then he spent the rest of his life paying for that afternoon in a currency nobody could see. He shook his head slowly. He came here in 81, stood on the porch in the rain. An hour and 40 minutes, Olivia said. Frank stopped. He wrote that down. He wrote everything down. An hour and 40 minutes, Frank said, and his mouth went unsteady for the first time. I sat on the stairs the whole time. I could see his shoes under the door. Mr. Mercer. Olivia was crying and not hiding it. He wrote to you 19 times. He never wrote. He wrote 19 times. She put the bundle in his lap. Between 1982 and 2016, and Ruth sent them back. Frank Mercer looked down at the letters on the blanket. He picked up the top one with those enormous hands and turned it over and looked at the back where it was still sealed and made a sound that no one in that room ever talked about afterward. "Ruthie," he said. "She was protecting you," the nephew said from the doorway. "I know what she was doing." He was shaking. "I know exactly what she was doing. That's what a daughter does, and I'd have done the same thing." He pressed his hand flat on the stack. 34 years. "Do you want to open one?" Ethan said. "No." "Mr. Mercer?" "Not yet. Not with an audience." He looked up, and he was 92, and completely present. "You, mechanic." "Yes, sir." "Walt says you saw the weld." "I said every 11th bead was a hair wide." "Because my hand got tired." "Yes, sir." Frank Mercer studied him for a long moment. "How much did you pay for that car, son?" $1. "And what have they offered you for it?" $11 million, Ethan said. "This week." "And," I said no. "Why?" Ethan opened his mouth and found he had to think about it. "Because a man told your friend the price," he said. "And the price wasn't money, and I've been trying for 11 days to figure out if I'm allowed to be the person he meant." Frank Mercer smiled for the first time. "Wrong," he said. "Sir, you don't get to decide if you're allowed. That's the whole trick." He tapped the arm of the chair with one huge finger. "The ones who ask are the ones. That's the entire test, son. It was never complicated. It was just long." He looked over at Olivia. "You brought her." "She drove," Ethan said. "Huh." Frank considered her. "Arthur's girl drove 9 hours to hand me a stack of letters that make her father look like a man who begged." "Yes, sir." "Why'd you do that?" Olivia Sterling wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "Because he'd have done it," she said, "if he'd been better at it." Frank Mercer nodded slowly, and then he said, "Well, then we're square." They opened the white envelope that night in a motel room in Marquette at 9:20, all of them together, because Frank Mercer had said out loud that he wanted to know what was in it, and he wanted to know before he slept. The nephew drove him over. Ethan handed it to Olivia. "It says to whoever starts her," she said. "That's you." "Ms. Sterling, I've been carrying this thing for 12 days. Take it." She opened it. There were 2 pages, and the handwriting was shakier than the journal, and it was dated 11 weeks before Arthur Sterling died. She read it out loud. "If you are reading this, you found her under the seat or you found the tunnel. And either way, you were not looking for money, because a man looking for money would have sold her before he took her apart. My name is Arthur Sterling, and I am going to tell you the truth in the correct order for the first time. In 1980, I sold a process that belonged to a better man than me. I told myself it was for 41 employees. 30 of them were laid off inside 2 years anyway, and I have never once been able to make that arithmetic come out. Frank burned Meridian. I have known that since the week it happened. I never said one word to any investigator, and that is the only decent thing I did in that entire year, and I have held on to it like a man holding a coin in his fist. He gave me the car, and he named the price. Raise somebody who can look at her and see what she is, instead of what she is worth. I have started her every first Sunday for 30 years, and I have never once been able to say the price was paid. That is not my daughter's failure. My daughter is the most capable person I have ever produced, and I built her a world where being right was the only thing that was ever rewarded. And then I was surprised when she stopped being able to see anybody who was wrong. That is my failure. It has my name on it. So I am doing the only thing I have left. I am not leaving her the car, and I am not putting it in the catalog, and I am not telling anyone it is here. I am leaving it where the wrong kind of person will step over it, and the right kind of person will stop. Whoever you are, you owe me nothing. The car is yours. But I would ask you one thing, and you may refuse it. If my daughter ever comes to you, and she will, because she is thorough, and she is stubborn, and she is mine, do not sell it back to her. Tell her the truth instead. She has never in her life been given a thing she could not buy, and I am the man who did that to her, and I am out of time to fix it. Tell her I said the sandwich at the park was hers, not mine. She will not know what that means. Ask her anyway. Nobody in that room said anything for a long time. Olivia Sterling sat on the end of a motel bed with 2 pages in her hands and made no sound at all. "I don't remember the park," she said finally. "I know," Ethan said. "I was 4. I don't remember it." He did. She folded the letter along the creases he had made and held it against her chest with both hands, and Frank Mercer said from the chair by the door, "Well, hell. Mr. Mercer, 30 years. The old man's voice was rough. 30 years he sat out there in that garage flogging himself, and the answer was he'd already raised her. She was 4 years old, and she'd already got it, and he taught it out of her by accident, and then couldn't see he could teach it back." Olivia looked up. "Can he?" she said. "Can it be taught back?" Frank Mercer looked at a woman who had driven 9 hours to make herself look terrible. "Girl," he said, "what do you think today was?" The car sold on a Saturday in October at 11:22 in the morning. It went to auction because Frank Mercer said it should, and because the drawings had been published 2 weeks earlier in a joint filing that Olivia Sterling paid for and signed her own name to over the written objection of 4 members of her board, 3 of whom resigned within a month and 1 of whom is currently being deposed. The room was full. There were people standing at the back. Ethan Carter sat at the 4th row in a jacket he'd bought for a funeral 3 years earlier, with his son beside him in a clip-on tie, and Walt Hendricks on the aisle, and Olivia Sterling on the other side of Sam, and none of them had said a word in 4 minutes. Bidding opened at $3 million. It was at 6, inside 90 seconds. At 8.5 it slowed, and 2 phones fought about it for a while, and Sam whispered, "Dad, is that real?" And Ethan whispered back, "None of it's real till the hammer, bud." It hammered at $9 million. The room made a noise. Somebody behind them said, "God Almighty." And Ethan Carter sat there in the 4th row and found to his complete astonishment that he felt almost nothing at all. He turned his head. Olivia was watching him. "You okay?" she said. "I keep waiting." "For what?" "For it to be the big part." He looked at the empty stand where a rusted car had sat 60 seconds ago. "Ms. Sterling, $9 million just happened to me, and it's the 4th most important thing that's happened to me this year." She smiled with her eyes full. "What are the other 3? "A bootlace," Ethan said. "A porch in Marquette. And a man who told me the ones who ask are the ones." Sam tugged his sleeve. "Dad, everybody's looking at us." Ethan Carter stood up and buttoned his funeral jacket and took his son's hand. "Let 'em look," he said. It was 11:26 on that Saturday morning, 4 minutes after the hammer, when a woman with a clipboard found Ethan Carter in the hallway outside the auction room and told him the buyer wished to remain anonymous. "That's allowed." "It's common, Mr. Carter." "Ma'am, does anonymous mean I never find out, or does anonymous mean I find out in a year?" "It means the house doesn't tell you," she said. "It doesn't mean the world doesn't." Sam was pulling at his clip-on tie. "Dad, what's anonymous?" "It means somebody spent $9 million and doesn't want their name in the paper," Ethan said. "Which, in my limited experience, means one of 2 things." "What 2 things?" "Either they're modest," Ethan said, "or they're hiding." Walt Hendricks came out of the room with his hat in his hands and stopped. "Son?" "I know. You know who I'd bet on." "Walt?" "I'd bet on the fellas who wanted them drawings back." And that was the thought that sat in Ethan Carter's chest for the next 19 days. Because it made sense. It made a terrible amount of sense. There was a company with 14 years of patent litigation built on the idea that nothing predated 2009. And there was now a car sitting in a crate with a chassis number stamped 1978, and $9 million was not very much money to a company like that if it bought the ability to put that car in a warehouse and never open the door again. Olivia Sterling did not say a word about any of it on the drive home. The wire hit on Tuesday at 9:40 in the morning. Ethan was on his back under a customer's Buick when his phone buzzed on his chest, and he looked at it, and he did not get up for about 2 minutes. Then he rolled out, walked to the office, sat down in the chair, and called the bank to confirm it, because he did not believe screens. "Sir, I can confirm the deposit." Can you say the number out loud? I'm sorry. Ma'am, I need somebody who isn't me to say the number out loud. She said it out loud. Ethan Carter thanked her, hung up, and went and stood in the middle of his own shop, where a rusted car had sat for 11 weeks, and put his hands on top of his head and said, "Sarah, you would not believe this." Then he went upstairs, took the bank letter out of the drawer, the one he'd carried in his shirt pocket for a month, and paid off a mortgage that was 79 days behind, and it took him 4 minutes on a laptop. And that was the part that nearly broke him. 4 minutes. 3 years of arithmetic at 2 in the morning, and it took 4 minutes. He drove to Marquette on Thursday. He didn't call ahead. Walt came with him and slept most of the way, and when they got to the little greenhouse with the ramp built by somebody who wasn't a carpenter, Frank Mercer was in the chair by the window, and the nephew let them in without a word. "You're back," Frank said. "Yes, sir." "They sell her. 9 million. Huh. Frank's enormous hands didn't move on the blanket. "That's a lot of money for a car that never got out of second gear. Mr. Mercer, I came up here to say something, and I've been practicing it for 4 hours, so let me get it out." Ethan sat down across from him. "Half of that's yours." Frank looked at him. "No," he said. "Sir, no. You built it." "Son, I built it, and then I gave it away, and I gave it away with a price on it, and you paid the price." Frank's chin came up. "You want to hand me $4.5 million? That's you buying something. That's not you sharing." "Buying what?" "Peace of mind." Frank's mouth twitched. "Which you can't have. Nobody gets it. Sit down." Ethan sat. "How old are you?" 38. "And what were you before you were a mechanic? An engineer?" "What did they do to you?" Ethan told him. It took 6 minutes. Frank Mercer listened the way he had probably listened to everything for 92 years, which was completely without once making a sound. At the end, he said, "Huntsville." "Yes, sir." "And you quit?" "I quit. How long did it cost you?" 11 years and my wife's insurance." "There it is." Frank nodded slowly. "That's the bill, son. Everybody thinks the bill comes the day you say no. It don't. It comes for the next 20 years in little pieces and nobody sends you a statement." "Yes, sir. So don't you give me half." Frank pointed one huge finger at him. "Don't you dare. You go do something with it that makes the next kid's bill smaller. That's the only thing money's ever been good for, and I'm 92, so I'm allowed to say it flat." Walt said from the corner, "Frank?" "What?" "He ain't gonna listen." "I know he ain't gonna listen," Frank said. "Look at him. He's got the face. Arthur had that face." That was the first time anyone had told Ethan Carter he looked like Arthur Sterling, and it landed in a place he hadn't known was open. He asked before he left, "Did you open them?" Frank didn't answer for a while. "Some." "How many?" 11. The old man's voice thinned out. "I do about 1 a week. Any more than that, and I don't sleep." "What are they?" "Mostly nothing." Frank looked at the window. "Man talking about his knees. Man telling me a fellow we knew died. 1989, he wrote 4 pages about a fishing trip and never once said the word sorry, and I sat here and laughed out loud. Because that was Arthur. That was exactly Arthur. He'd walk 9 miles around a thing." He paused. "And then the last line of it says I think about the roof." "The roof?" "Meridian had a bad roof." Frank's eyes came back. "He fixed it in 78 out of his own pocket and never told me. I found out from the roofer." Ethan didn't say anything. 19 letters, Frank said. 34 years. And Ruthie sent everyone back, and I don't blame her 1 inch. And I want you to understand that both of those things are true at the same time, son. Because that's the part nobody ever tells you about being old. It's all true at the same time." Ethan stood to go. "Mechanic." "Sir." "Number 19, Frank said. 2016. That's the last one he ever sent, and I ain't opened it, and I'm not going to open it alone." "Then don't. You'll come back." "Mr. Mercer," Ethan said, "you couldn't keep me out of Michigan with a wall." The lawsuit landed in November. Not against Ethan. against Olivia Sterling personally by 4 former board members and one holding company that had spent 14 years building a patent position on the premise that nothing predated 2009 and had watched a woman with her own name on the letterhead file 46-year-old drawings into the public record without asking anybody. Donna Ochoa called Ethan at 7 in the morning to tell him. How bad? Bad. They're going after her for breach of fiduciary duty. The theory is she destroyed shareholder value on purpose. Did she? Mr. Carter. Dana said she destroyed about $400 million of shareholder value in 11 minutes with a notary present. She absolutely did. Ethan called her that afternoon. You didn't tell me. Why would I tell you? Ms. Sterling, it's my company, and it's my mess, and you have a 9-year-old. Her voice was steady, in a way he'd learned to be suspicious of. There's no version of this where you help. There's one. There isn't. There is, and you know exactly what it is, and you don't want to ask me for it. He waited. So I'll say it. I'll testify. Silence on the line. You'd have to sit in a room with their lawyers for 2 days. I've sat in a room with worse. They'll bring up your wife. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Why would they bring up my wife? Because they'll say you had a financial motive, and to say that they'll need to say you were broke, and to say you were broke, they'll walk through every bill you couldn't pay in 2023. Her voice cracked once, and she pulled it back in. I've read the deposition outline. I read it Tuesday. That's why I didn't call you. Ms. Sterling. Mr. Carter, I have done one decent thing in my entire adult life, and I am not going to pay for it with your wife's medical file. You don't get to decide that. I'm deciding it. No, ma'am. Ethan stood up. You threw keys at my chest in front of 200 people, and I let you because I decided what I was willing to take that day. That was mine. This one's mine too. She was crying. He could hear it, and she didn't try to hide it, which was new. Why? She said. Because your father wrote that his failure had his name on it, Ethan said. And you're the only person I've ever watched pick up somebody else's failure and carry it out the door in public. He paused. Ms. Sterling, that's the whole thing. That's the entire test. Frank told me, and I didn't understand it for a month. The deposition ran 2 days in January. They did bring up his wife. On the second morning, a lawyer in a very good suit asked Ethan Carter to confirm that in March of 2023, he had missed a payment on a hospital bill, and Ethan said yes, and the lawyer asked him to confirm the amount, and Ethan said $11,440 from memory, without looking at the exhibit. The lawyer looked up. You know that figure by heart. Sir, Ethan said, I know all of them by heart. The room got very quiet, and Olivia Sterling put her hand over her mouth, and her attorney wrote one word on a legal pad and underlined it twice. They settled in March. The terms were sealed. 2 of the 4 board members left the industry. The patent portfolio collapsed on its own about 14 months later, which surprised nobody who had actually read the 1978 drawings. And on a Tuesday in April, at 4:20 in the afternoon, Ethan Carter drove to Marquette because the nephew had called and said today. Frank Mercer was in the chair. He was smaller. That was the thing Ethan hadn't been ready for. Mechanic. Yes, sir. Number 19. You sure? I'm 93 next month, Frank said. I ain't sure of anything, that's why we're doing it now. Ethan opened it. 2016. 2 pages. Arthur Sterling's handwriting already going shaky. Frank said, Read it out. Ethan read it out. Most of it was a man talking about his knees and a fella they'd both known who had died and the weather in Ohio, and 4 sentences about a boat he was thinking of buying and didn't buy. And then the last paragraph. I bought the lot in 1981. I have never built on it. I pay the taxes every January, and my accountant has asked me about it 40 times, and I have never given him an answer he liked. It is 9 acres, and there is nothing on it, and I have never once driven past it. The deed is enclosed. It is in your name, and it has been in your name since 1981, which means you have owned 9 acres in Ohio for 35 years. And I have been paying the taxes on land that was never mine. I do not know what it is for Frank. I only know I could not stand to let anybody else build on it." Ethan turned the page over. There was a deed folded behind it. Recorded. Notarized. Frank Mercer's name typed in a machine in 1981. Nobody in that room said anything for a long minute. Then Frank Mercer said, "That's where the shop was." "Yes, sir." "That's the ground." "Yes, sir." The old man leaned back and shut his eyes. 35 years, he said. 35 years he paid taxes on a hole in the ground because he couldn't stand to see a gas station on it. "Frank," Walt said, and that was all he could get out. "Mechanic." "Sir." Frank Mercer opened his eyes, and they were wet, and they were absolutely clear. "You got $9 million, he said, "and I got 9 acres, and I have got maybe 4 months, and I am going to ask you a question, and I want a fast answer, because slow answers are for people with time. Ask me. What are you going to build on my ground?" And Ethan Carter, who had been turning something over in his head since a Tuesday morning in October and had not said it out loud to one living soul, said it out loud. "A school," he said. Frank Mercer started to laugh. He laughed until he coughed, and the nephew came in, and he waved him off, and he sat there with his enormous hands shaking on the blanket. "A school," he said. "In my shop." "Yes, sir." "Teaching what?" "Hands," Ethan said. "Welding, machining, diagnostics, fabrication, free. 18 months. Tools included because tools are why people quit." He leaned forward. "Veterans first, then single parents, then anybody who walks in the door and doesn't have a better option." "How many?" 20 a year to start." "Not enough." "It's what 9 million buys, sir, if you want it to still be there in 20 years. Frank Mercer nodded slowly at that, because it was an engineer's answer, and he had been an engineer for 70 years. "Who teaches the welding?" Ethan looked at the corner of the room. Walt Hendricks straightened up like he'd been shot at. "Oh no. Walt, I'm 71 years old. Frank taught you out of pure spite," Ethan said. "You've got 20 years of spite left in you, easy." "I ain't a teacher." "Walt," Frank Mercer said. "Don't." "Walt." The old man's voice was quiet. "You swept my floor for a year, and I never once told you that you were good. And then you spent 31 years mowing a rich man's grass, and I never called you either." He paused. "I'm calling you now." Walt Hendricks sat down on the edge of the bed and put his face in his hands for the second time in this story. "Somebody's going to have to help me with the paperwork," he said. Frank Mercer died on the 11th of August at 4 in the morning in his own house, with his nephew holding one hand. He had opened all 19 letters by then. He'd finished the last one in June and told Ethan on the phone that it took him 8 weeks to read 34 years, which he thought was about the right speed. The funeral was small. 41 people came, which nobody planned, and everybody noticed. Olivia Sterling flew in and sat in the back and did not speak, and afterward she found Ethan by the cars and said, "Do you know what he left me? He left you something. A wrench." She held it up, old, heavy, the handle worn shiny in one place. "The nephew handed it to me in a paper bag. There's a note." "What's it say?" She read it out. "For the Sterling girl. It don't do anything by itself." Olivia laughed and cried at the same time, which is a thing people do at funerals and nowhere else. "He knew I wouldn't know what to do with it," she said. "Ma'am, I think that's the point of the note." "Yes, thank you. I got there." They broke ground in October. Ethan sold the shop in Millbrook to the guy who ran the machine shop on 3rd and moved the whole operation 90 minutes north to 9 acres that had been empty since April of 1980, and he did it for one reason, which was that Sam had asked to change schools, and Ethan had asked why, and Sam had said, "Because everybody here only knows me from the video." That was the last time the video ever came up in that family. The building went up over the winter. It was ugly, and it was cheap, and it was enormous, and Ethan spent $110,000 on the roof, which every contractor told him was insane for a metal building. Walt asked him about it. Why the roof? Walt? It's a barn, son. It's a nice barn, but it's a barn. 1978, Ethan said. Arthur Sterling fixed Frank Mercer's roof out of his own pocket and never told him. Walt didn't ask anything else about the roof. The sign went up in March, and that was the argument. Olivia had put in $11 million of her own money by then, which she had done through a foundation with a name nobody recognized. And she had done it on the specific condition that she would never appear at a ribbon cutting. And she had broken that condition exactly once, which was the day of the sign. "I wanted to say Sterling," she said. "No, ma'am." "Mr. Carter, my father. Your father wrote in a book that his failure had his name on it," Ethan said. "You want to put his name on the one thing that came out right, and I understand it, and no." "Then what?" Ethan pointed at the truck. The nephew had driven down from Marquette with it in the bed, wrapped in a moving blanket, and it took 4 men to get it up on the wall because it was hand-painted plywood from 1977, and it weighed 140 pounds, and it had been in a barn in the Upper Peninsula for 46 years. Meridian Works. Olivia Sterling stood in the parking lot and looked up at it for a long time. "He kept the sign," she said. "He kept the sign. He burned the building and he kept the sign." "Ma'am," Ethan said, "I've thought about that a lot, and I think that's the most honest thing anybody in this whole story ever did." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, which was a thing she did now, and which Ethan had noticed she'd picked up in a garage in Millbrook and never put down. "Fine," she said. "Meridian. Thank you. But I'm putting a plaque inside. Ms. Sterling, it's my $11 million, Mr. Carter, and I'm putting a plaque inside, and it's going to say Frank Mercer, and underneath, it's going to say the thing he told you." "Which thing?" Olivia Sterling looked at him. "The ones who ask are the ones," she said. The first class had 19 students, which nobody planned either. 6 veterans, 4 single mothers, 2 men in their 50s who had been laid off from the same plant on the same day in 2019, a woman named Dolores who was 61 and had spent her entire life wanting to weld and had never told a soul until the intake interview, at which point she cried and then apologized for crying, and then welded better than anybody in the room by week 9, and a 19-year-old kid from Millbrook named Tyler Whitfield. Ethan looked at the application for a long time before he processed it. Then he called Sam in from the shop floor. "Bud, come here a second." "What?" Ethan turned the screen around. Sam read it. His face went through about 4 things. "That's Kayla's brother." "It is." "He called you a beggar." "He did." "He's the reason I got in a fight." "He is." Ethan leaned back. "So I'm asking." Sam Carter was 11 years old now, and he stood there in a shop apron with somebody else's brake dust on his hands, and he took his time, and Ethan let him. "Is he any good?" Sam said. "His shop teacher says he's the best hands he's had in 15 years, and he's been working 30 hours a week at a car wash since he was 16 because his dad's gone." Sam nodded slowly. "Then he should come," he said, "but I'm not being his friend." "You don't have to be his friend, okay?" Sam started back toward the floor, then stopped in the doorway. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Does he know it's your school?" "Bud." Ethan said, "It's on the sign." Tyler Whitfield came anyway. He lasted 3 days before he found Ethan in the machine room and said, "Mr. Carter, can I talk to you?" And stood there with his jaw locked while he got it out. "I said something about you." "I heard. I was 17, and my mom said it first, and I just repeated it, and I've thought about it every day since I saw the news." "Okay." "That's it." Ethan set down the caliper. "Son, I'm going to tell you the thing my wife used to tell me, and then we're going to go turn some steel." He looked at him. "You don't get to fix what you said. There's no button. What you get to do is be somebody who wouldn't say it starting right now for about 40 years, and then when you're old, you get to look back, and you get to be reasonably sure." Tyler Whitfield swallowed hard. That's a long time. It's the only offer on the table, Ethan said. You want it or not? He took it. He graduated 18 months later at the top of his class, and he works in Toledo now, doing certified aerospace welding, and every August he drives down and teaches a 2-day seminar for free, and he has never once been asked to. The car came back on a Thursday in September. Ethan wasn't expecting it. There was a truck in the lot at 6:40 in the morning and a driver with paperwork, and Ethan read the paperwork 3 times. Then he called Olivia Sterling at 6:50 in the morning. You bought it. Silence. Ms. Sterling, you were sitting 4 feet from me. You were sitting next to my son, and your agent was on a phone in the back of that room, and you bid $9 million, and you watched my face while you did it. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd have said no. Her voice was very level. Mr. Carter, you'd have said it was mine to sell, and it wasn't mine to buy, and we'd have had the whole conversation again, and I was tired and I wanted it done. Ms. Sterling, I didn't put it back in the garage. She said it fast, like she'd been waiting a year to say it. I want you to know that. I never took it home. It's been in climate storage in Detroit for 11 months while the museum built the case, and the loan agreement went back and forth, and the loan is 50 years, and it goes on public display in November, and the placard says the vehicle was designed and constructed by Francis Mercer of Meridian Works, Ohio, 1977 to 1980. Ethan sat down on the bumper of somebody's project truck. And what's it doing in my parking lot? It's doing 8 weeks in your parking lot, Olivia said, because I told the museum that the first place it goes is the ground it was built on, and they told me that wasn't standard, and I told them what I was donating, and they discovered some flexibility. Ethan put his hand over his eyes. Mr. Carter. Yes, ma'am. Is that all right? Ms. Sterling, he said, the first Sunday of the month is in 3 days. I know, she said. Why do you think I sent it now? They started it at 7 in the morning on a Sunday in September, and there were about 60 people there, which was every student and every instructor, and Dana Ochoa, and a nephew who'd driven 9 hours from Marquette. Walt Hendricks got in and turned the key because nobody had to discuss it. It caught on the 3rd try, exactly like it had in a leaking garage in Millbrook 2 years earlier, and it settled into that idle with 2 notes in it, and Walt Hendricks sat in the driver's seat of Frank Mercer's car on the ground, where Frank Mercer's shop had stood, and put both hands on the wheel and did not get out for a while. They let it run 20 minutes. Then they shut it off and nobody clapped because it turned out nobody wanted to. Olivia Sterling found Ethan afterward standing by the door of the fabrication bay, watching 19 people go back to work on a Sunday morning nobody had asked them to come in for. Can I tell you something? She said. Sure. I've given away $410 million in 2 years. I know. You don't know, actually, because I've never told anybody, and I never will, and I'm telling you because you're the only person who won't say something nice about it. Ms. Sterling, that's the most flattering thing anybody's said to me all year. She laughed. 900 employees got a pension floor. Every family from the 1982 layoffs that we could find got a check and a letter with my father's name on it. There are scholarships. There's a clinic in Millbrook. She stopped. And none of it has moved 1 inch of the thing that actually hurts. No, ma'am. You knew that. I did. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have believed me, Ethan said, and because it wasn't wasted. 900 people have a pension. That's real. It's just not medicine. Olivia was quiet. I don't remember the park, she said. I still don't. I've tried for 2 years. Ms. Sterling, I was 4 years old, and I gave a boy my sandwich, and it's the single most important thing I ever did, and it's gone. Ethan Carter looked out at the floor where Dolores, who was 63 now, was standing over a 19-year-old kid's shoulder, telling him his travel angle was garbage. Ma'am, he said, can I tell you what I think? Please. I don't think your father wrote that down because of the sandwich. She turned. He wrote it down, Ethan said, because he watched a 4-year-old do it without being told, and he understood in that second that it was already in you and it hadn't come from him. That's what scared him. He spent 30 years thinking he had to put something into you, and he was wrong. It was in there the whole time. He just built a world on top of it. Olivia Sterling stood in the doorway of a metal building on 9 acres in Ohio and cried the way people cry when something finally lands in the right place. "Then what was the car for?" she said. Ethan thought about a bootlace and a porch in the rain and 600 cold starts and 6 miles on a clock. "It was a shovel," he said. Sam came up at 9 the way he did every Sunday with 2 cups of coffee and one for himself, now that he was 12 and had negotiated it. "Dad, Dolores says the plasma table's throwing a fault." "Tell her to check the ground clamp." "She said you'd say that, and she said tell him I already did." "Then tell her I'll be there in a minute, and she was right and I was wrong." Sam grinned and went off, and Olivia watched him go. "He's not the same kid." "No, ma'am." He was so angry. He was 9 years old, and he watched a grown woman throw keys at his father. Ethan said without any weight on it at all because 2 years had taken the weight off. "He gets to have been angry." "Mr. Carter." Olivia turned to face him. "I have never actually asked you this, and I've wanted to for 2 years. Why did you say thank you? In the garage, you knelt down in front of 200 people and picked up keys out of the dirt, and you said thank you, ma'am. I'll take good care of it." "Why?" Ethan Carter looked at a sign that said, "Meridian Works, hand-painted in 1977, hanging over a school that taught 19 people a year for free." "Because I meant it," he said. "Even then. Ms. Sterling especially then." He handed her the second coffee. "That's the part everybody gets wrong about that video. They think I was being humble. I wasn't being humble. I was being accurate. Somebody handed me a thing everybody else in that county had already decided was worthless, and I was the only man on that property who could see what it was, and that is the single luckiest thing that has ever happened to me." "And the money. The money was the smallest part of it," Ethan said. "It was just the loudest." They stood there a while. "Do you want to know what he'd say?" Olivia asked. "My father. If he could see this, what would he say?" She smiled, and it was nothing like the smile she'd worn in a garage on a Saturday 2 years earlier. "He wouldn't say anything," she said. "He'd stand in the back and count the room." 200 people laughed at a mechanic in work boots that day. Every one of them went home certain they had watched a man lose. They were wrong, and they had been wrong for a long time, and they were wrong about the same thing every crowd is always wrong about, because the world will never once tell you where the valuable thing is buried. It only tells you where everybody has already agreed not to look. Ethan Carter looked anyway. That is the whole story, and it is the only lesson in it. The measure of a person is never what they own. It is what they are willing to see in something and in someone that everyone else has already thrown away.